accept cycles of death and cycles of life, and how to so kind of like it's that fermentation stage in alchemy where you have to allow things to die in your own life. And right now, this is the stage when we are all having to go inside of ourselves, and old parts of ourselves are having to die, and we must embrace this time and allow the old ways we've been doing things must die. So people talk about here, please can lockdown, end. Yeah, it would be great if lockdown ends. Our economy can't handle it. But at the same time, I'm like, but the longer we stay in this, the longer we're forced to be inside, to go inside, and to undo the way we used to do things. We have to be ingenious. So I look at it from that perspective.
Thank you so much for being on today, Julia Tiffin. Please introduce yourself. So you are a inspiration of mine. I've known you for, 11, 12 years in the mystery school, and I've seen you transform so many times, and I appreciate that, because I also, you and I resonate on that alchemical level and really love transmuting ourselves. And please introduce yourself to everybody. Tell everyone where you are, where you live, what you're doing.
Good. Thank you, Sarah. I'm super excited to be here. And I'm glad that we finally managed to get a time to get together. I'm currently speaking from Cape Town. So it's late afternoon here at the moment. Cape Town in South Africa. And I'm actually, to be honest, I'm recreating myself. I'm en route to London once we can travel once more. I'm relocating. And yes, it's been, the mystery school journey has literally allowed me to rewrite myself many, many times. Before the mystery school, I have another history, but since I've been in the mystery school path, I have anchored the mystery school in Africa, in different countries in Africa, and also in the Middle East. And now I'm sort of completed in my work in South Africa. I need to focus on expansion into Africa, but also now supporting the work in the UK and in Europe. So it's another jump as well for me. Amazing. So I'm just excited to share with whatever I can, because reinvention is how I live. So whatever I can share today and be of any use, I'd really love to share it.
Well, I love that, because kind of our preamble to the interview, we were talking about your book that's going to come out, and it's about death and rebirth. And you went through kind of an extended period of the death of your mother, who was such an important person in your life. And this is such a powerful time of death. And I want to hear your perspective on death. So when we talk about death, often people think about death of a loved one or death of ourselves, but death is happening all the time. Our cells die every single day. Ideas come and go. They come, they're birthed, they die. Death can be such a powerful jumping off point to the next step, but people hold themselves back because they're so scared of death. Can you just take it away? Talk to us about death.
I'm going to talk a bit about the book in a moment. I'm just going to say what's really amazing is that there's some writing from somewhere that talks about the fact that the sun dies every day, and then it is reborn every morning. And we've been living in this flow of death and rebirth every day. And yet we are actually terrified of death. And when we look at how terrified we are of our own death or of the death of our loved ones, it is literally a mirror reflection of how we're scared of death, of things we need to be doing every day. It's a death of old identities we once were. Like, I remember when I was an international photographer artist, and when I first got the life activation wand that we get in the Healers Academy, I was horrified, because I am not a healer. I'm not some person that goes to some kind of fair with a little tarot, I don't know, like a little, gypsy scarf, and I'm not a healer. I am a photographer and lecturer, and so I held onto my identity really tight, and of course I had loosened my grip and I let that die within me. But we really need to work very hard, especially now, to reframe how we see death and to start understanding what death is. The time is now, And so right now, we are in an absolutely amazing time where we've never before, an entire world, every country in the world has never gone through the same experience at the same time. And what it has done across the world is put everyone at home, everyone into an isolated space. Now, when we are needing to go through a phase in our life when we need to let go of the old, what we go through is kind of like what we often go through is called the dark night of the soul, where we start to realize how we've done things previously is not really working, and we start questioning things and going really deep inside. And when we go to that phase, we sort of go into a cave. Now, we don't necessarily go into a cave like we would have if we lived in nature, but we go into a cave in our modern world by not going out with our friends as much, by not putting on so much music, by just being quiet at home and just wanting to be with ourselves. And what's amazing is that the entire world is being forced to stay inside and not to spend time outside, ignoring ourselves. We're actually having to be with ourselves. So we're being forced into the space of the cave right now. And really, it's when we go into that cave is where it's like when you make an alchemical elixir. The equivalent of the cave is when you take that alchemical elixir and you've taken it through various processes, and then now you're going to leave it in a dark cupboard for a couple of months. And similarly, that feeling of going into a cave is just like the feeling of being in a cupboard, as if you were an elixir. And it's like a warm, slow, it's like a warm fire, and slowly old things inside of you start dying because you're now forced to be within. It reminds me very much of what it takes to make compost as well, where you have to allow all those banana peels and other peels and whatnot to really break down, to putrefy. In fact, the experience is actually not so great. I mean, putrefaction smells, it's not pleasant. I think people at home have been frustrated, they've been uncomfortable, they've been discombobulated, not knowing where they are in time and space. It hasn't been an easy time. This putrefaction is unpleasant. It's an in-between space. And people are scared of it. Why? Because it's uncomfortable. And old fears are surfacing. Fears of survival, fears of, gosh, all kinds of fears are emerging. But the truth is that we are being forced into a mass putrefaction process or mass process of going inside. And I really feel it's important that we as a world, as many of us as possible, embrace it and start allowing these things you've been doing for a long time, you've probably hated. Actually, I think if there's one thing I've realized is, oh, this thing I did for years that I used to love, I actually don't like it anymore. I don't want to do that ever again. I'm done with that. I'm never doing that anymore. Like, we actually need to start realizing that we can let go of stuff we actually haven't liked. We've just been doing it because we had to. Mm-hmm. It's like, no, you don't have to anymore. We can let that die. And then if we allow enough time for this dying process, then that compost, that pre-compost can actually become compost. And then new ideas that are going to pop into our mind in these in-between spaces can actually start being fertilized in this new soil. So my book that I've written actually is called Light as a Feather. It's a manual for living and a manual for dying. And yes, I did write it as a result of the deep observations of my mom's 18-month dying process. And I learned so much through that process. It totally rebirthed me. I mean, there's no question I'm nowhere near the person I was before that. And there's just so much when we can do when we start embracing the dying process and start realizing that it's only through accepting it am I actually going to be able to create the new. So it doesn't have to be as dramatic as an 18-month dying process of a mother. We need to realize that the cycles of life and death is constant. So we are here to constantly discover who we are, but it's a constant discovery. So even if you had a fantastic business, it was excellent and outstanding, and you suddenly wake up realizing, oh my God, I'm done.
Yeah.
It's really better. Oh my God. And you know it. Oh God, it's done. And then you keep trying to make it work for years because can't be done. I'm making money and I can't leave it. And you rationalize why you shouldn't. No, I can't leave that wonderful business I've built. So it isn't always about something bad that has to end. We need to embrace the cycles of death and life as being our normal. And the minute we feel, oh, I'm done with that, we need to embrace it and go, I am complete. And from that, allowing that to die, what that meant to you, allowing if you've built up an identity and your ego has become attached to this thing you've become, let that die. Because guess what? You would never be getting an instinct to let something die if something amazing didn't lie beyond that. Now, unfortunately, we don't know. We don't know what lies beyond. But it's important we start embracing the cycles of death and life and start having faith in the process, even if we don't know absolutely what new lies beyond. If we live like that, ironically, we live life alive, which is why my book, Light as a Feather, is a manual for living and a manual for dying. Because it's actually, I don't even really speak about this in the book. I think this may be the second book, but really it is actually a pattern for living life alive, actually, and just basically embracing it. So my message for everyone right now is, wherever we are in the world, in different stages of lockdowns. I know Canada right now is going, certainly Manitoba is going into quite an uplifting next phase. Many of your shops can open. There's a lot that you can do. We've just, in South Africa, we've just today, literally, we've been able to now go outside between 6 and 9 a.m. within 5 kilometers of your house. It's very exciting because we are a nation of exercisers. So there are many people that are really cooped up and they want to go and run on beaches and mountains, and so it's a very exciting day. I, however, did miss 6 to 9 a.m. this morning because I had other important things to do. So maybe tomorrow morning, because it's a very tight window to be able to go out. So my biggest concern is, as the lockdowns start getting shifted in the world, is have we embraced this time to let things go, to really realize how much I don't want to do something anymore. I must say, I don't know how you were, Sarah, for the first 3 weeks, but the first 3 weeks, I was first 2 weeks, I was very organized, very disciplined, very structured. But by week 2, I started realizing, because I'm living on my own with a cat and my cat's boyfriend, who is a cat. And it started dragging. It started, no more hugs. It started feeling, a little bit, okay, I can do this, but my heart, it's feeling a bit rough, and it was uncomfortable. And there was definitely, first 3 weeks was unpleasant. Now week 5, I'm starting to come alive, because if I look back, I suddenly realize how many things I didn't like doing that I'm not going to do anymore.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So, but now I'm getting into it. So now I'm like, have we all done enough work during this time? Especially those of us that are light workers. And I have to say, for me, and I know that your many people you work with are entrepreneurs, I really feel that entrepreneurs should be just labeled light workers, because entrepreneurs are people that are driven to build a life from their own drumbeat. And equally, you're dependent on yourself for your income, but it's not a time to be scared now. It is a time to embrace rigorous death, or rigorously to embrace death, maybe I should say, to redefine and reinvent, because the entrepreneurs is who's going to lead the wave of the new in the world, rebirth what needs to happen.
Why do you think people are so afraid of death?
It's got a lot to do with the unknown. Well, first of all, actually, now that you're asking me a question, I'm thinking about it differently. I think it has a lot to do with the knowledge or lack of knowledge we receive in our education.
Mm-hmm.
The way death gets presented, it's something to be feared. We don't know where we're going. There's a lot of concepts around hell and damnation. And there's an idea that beyond death, it isn't really, there's no joy. It's not really, it's like, it's almost boring. It's almost too nice. I think some people think it's like just nice and fluffy. And that there isn't an ongoing progression or something really interesting
Mm-hmm.
and engaging and something awesome that lies beyond death. I think it's either you're going to go to hell or you're going to go to a nice fluffy cloud. Honestly, neither sound particularly exciting to me, but also but then also for people who don't believe in either, it's like this big unknown. So people run around honestly just addicted to the job, the 2.5 cats, 1 dog, 2 kids, the garage, the house, the mortgage. They get addicted to that game and keeping everything safe, and then the money goes out for the life insurance policies and the disability and dreaded disease policies and the life cover policies, and everyone is actually living in fear, trying to prevent death.
Yes.
And it's something which, I mean, actual death, there's something far more exciting that's beyond this physical. But people have ignorance of that because through indoctrination, really horrible alternatives have been presented to us. And then also this fear has led to a fear of change as well, I think. I'm not sure if that's the order, but we definitely, we have a fear of change. Death would be a big change. And so we need to understand that what keeps us living life alive is by embracing change. What actually is the only thing that's actually constant is change. And the only way to embrace change is to embrace death, because change means you've got to let go of something to allow something else to come.
Scared of death, if you're genuinely scared of death, then the only thing I can see is that you would live your life in such a way, you wouldn't live to live, you'd live to avoid death.
Exactly.
It's
exactly what I write about.
It's like when your parents would, it's like when those children that don't do things for compliments, they do things to avoid punishments.
Right.
And I have died twice. I had the whole death experience. Yeah, I saw the light. I came out of my body. Like so although I can't say I know what happens beyond death for me, I know that life goes on. I had a whole experience. I felt my own body. I looked at myself and said, I'm still in a body. I still have thoughts. I'm still me. I'm just not in that shell that's down there. And it liberated me in this entirely new way to, like, I'm not an idiot. I'm not trying to die, but I'm not scared.
Huge difference. And a huge difference if you're not scared of death. It's what the Buddhists in their path of enlightenment really, and I've got the term written down. I recently came across the actual term that they phrase it, but they actually have people from early on meditate on death to come to terms with it, so that it's not something which bites you, because the butterfly effects of the fear of death is quite far reaching, let me tell you, and how it infiltrates your mind and how it affects how you live is much bigger than people think. And we must reframe death. The other thing which we have to reframe is grief. Now, grief is a very different emotion to something like anger. Anger generally, we need to tell ourselves the truth if we're angry about something, and know that if we allow the anger to go unchecked, it can actually be pretty destructive. Grief, however, is an essential, it's part of the dying process. It's essential. Now, a grief can be a minute, it can be 3 months. It can be 3 weeks. So it does range depending on what you need to grieve. But grief and joy, just like life and death sit on two sides of one coin, grief and joy sit on two sides of one coin. And in Western culture, and now I'm going to talk about an actual dying person just as a reference point, but in Western culture, we don't have a culture where we really allow people enough time to grieve. Other cultures, they give people more time. Some cultures, you wear black for a year. Not that I think we should dictate a year, but nonetheless, we don't have a real understanding and acceptance of grieving. Now, what's really interesting is that if we look at the Kabbalah, we see that in the tree of life, there are teachings of where you have visions of wonder and sorrow, and really wonder and sorrow are sitting on, again, wonder and joy and sorrow sitting on two sides of the same coin. And it's only by allowing yourself to properly grieve something, like get through all of those emotions, will you get to the other side. Because here's an interesting thing. Grief, it's a bit like a substance which, like if you can think of a solvent. So if you need to get some kind of a sticky material or sticky stuff off like a clothes or something, you're going to put a solvent to dissolve it, right? Mm-hmm. Grief is a solvent that dissolves old stuff that you hold on to. When you grieve, you don't just let go of the person, you let go of all kinds of stuff that comes with it. It's like it's an incredibly powerful solvent for the old that's been defining your reality. Now, what's interesting is I see a large amount of anger in the world. And if you look at the hospice, they'll talk about the 5 stages of grief, of which one of them is anger. So, it could well be that we're seeing a sort of immature kind of expression of grief at the moment. And I'm just concerned we don't, again, go through the proper grieving process, because my God, can we please find a new flow for the world, because what we've got doesn't work anywhere, right? So part of life and birth is grief as well, and we must look at it.
Can I ask you another question?
Sure, of course.
So just thinking right now, the only thing that scares me about death would be the death of my husband. And this is now making me think that there's an element of attachment that also inhibits the death. Because obviously I don't want my husband to die, but I don't want to live in fear of him dying because I'm pregnant. And that would seem very so destructive in my own life, to be afraid of your children dying. So can you speak to because even if we're talking about someone's business, you're like, well, I don't want to let go of this because what are people going to think? What am I going to lose out on? How am I going to show face? There's these attachments around it. Can you talk about attachment and death, maybe?
I'm going to look at it a little bit differently. I'm going to give death a capital D. I'm going to give it a name.
Okay.
Death has an incredible intelligence. It is the great death. See that all in capitalization. What death requires of us, yes, is to ultimately let go of attachments. It's exactly the poisons that have to be dissolved. It's actually attachments to identities, ways of thinking, ways of seeing the world, physical realities. Like if I lose that person, I'm not going to be getting physical contact. Losing old stories, losing realities, losing experiences. So that's part of why in Buddhism, I believe, I'm not a Buddhist, but why starting with the primary fear of death. Once you're able to let go of fear of death, and as you said, now you don't have death of yourself isn't a problem, but oh my goodness, I realize I'm scared of losing my husband. When we start with meditating and dealing with my fear of death, we start letting go of attachments to many things. But really, at the end of the day, if there's one death still left over that you fear, it's gonna, there's an attachment there that it's going to control parts of your mind landscape, right? So just talking about death is already making you realize, oh my goodness, there's this one major attachment I have. It's a good relationship. It's a phenomenal relationship. And yet I think the question you may need to ask in your context is, how is this attachment affecting how I run my life right now? How I run my parts of my mind landscape? Because parts of your mind landscape, which should be infinite, has got a little bit of a control and a fear thing. Oh my God, what happens if I lose my husband?
Brilliant.
So, when I was talking about this need for grieving, see, this is why death is the great intelligence. Mm-hmm. Because whatever, is it a physical death or death of a business or whatever it is, because it knows where our attachments are sitting. And that's why we have to move through that grief process until it is done. Because the intelligence of death will help us to let go attachments we didn't even know we had. And you're talking about a person that's a pretty obvious and understandable attachment, and a pretty healthy one, to be honest, where you're at right now. It's pretty healthy. I mean, I wouldn't say it's a bad thing. But there are these subtle attachments we don't even realize we have, and they are literally poisoning the landscape, the mental landscape that we have, where infinite possibilities are possible, and yet we've just poisoned. It's like if you think of the mind as a water, a massive infinite pond of water, and when we bring an attachment into it, it just poisons. And unfortunately, when poison gets into water, it kind of spreads. So it might be just a bit of poison, but it's amazing how it just gets the whole mind polluted. So that's the other thing, is that if death wants to come and teach you, it is going to teach you about your attachments. Wow. And please, please, please embrace the grieving process. Do not be ashamed of it. Embrace it. Again, we're mixing up losing a person versus losing physical things or identities. They really merge into one. But in one particular culture, I think a shamanic culture, what would be standard is, like, let's say a woman lost her husband or a mother or someone significant, or a woman, a person, sorry, you would literally be left alone for 3 weeks, and you would go to the extremes of ripping up your clothes. You would literally get it out of your system so intensely. You wouldn't care about how you showed up. I mean, so many Western funerals, people are, do I have a tissues? I want anyone to see me. I'm crying. Have I got my, black on? And, when you're in the car, you put your, cover up on again. You redo your eyes. Like, no, guys, you're not supposed to show up pretty during grief. You got to grieve, man. Grief is essential. Without grief, we never grow. If man does not go through the grieving process, it is the mechanism through which the soul of man grows, is when we let go. But just to finish with that, so one thing, sorry, Sarah, just one thing. It doesn't always look as dramatic as ripping your clothes, okay? Some grief can last for a minute, like, oh, I broke my earring. Oh, my favorite earring. Oh, that's really horrible. Okay, I'm done. It can be, depends on what it is, right? But you do need to go through it, yes.
I think it's good to communicate with people that you're around. My husband's still learning. We're still like newly married, right? Like 4 years. So we still learn about each other. And honest to God, Jesus the Christ could come down on planet Earth. But if I'm in a grieving moment, like nothing he says, like the Lord and Savior is like, could like change my mind. I'm like, no, like I'm grieving, I'm sulking, everything is bad. Like, and I have to do that. And once I let it out, once I let all my sadness out, once I let all my emotions out, I'm crystal clear. And I'm not being fake in my responses. I'm just like, you know what? I've grieved it. I've let it go. What are we going to do now? But I have to know that about myself, and I have to communicate that with the people around me to say, like, please honor my process and please don't take it personally, because this is just me.
Yeah. There is the new, and I don't mean to criticize anyone in the new age, but I'm thinking back to the 80s and 90s, and it was, all love and light. And my goodness, you must always be love and light. No, we need to grieve. We need to grieve, and grief is relevant. And it's not about being a drama queen. It's not about, It's about being truly authentic. This is really, this is real. And some phases are just longer than others, and we just need to work with it. And what's interesting, I did actually, this is a total aside, I did actually write a chapter in my book about getting stuck and getting unstuck. Because sometimes if a grief is so deep and so profound, and it grips your soul in ways you have no words, it's possible to actually get lost in that as well. And I think we do see people in different cultures, if they've lost someone, they do get stuck in a grieving process. I actually, amazing enough, I went through it. I'm surprised at myself, but I did. And I have seen many people get stuck in almost like a numb, dull box. And you sort of get stuck there where you're not really living. You're sort of in limbo. And here's the interesting thing about that, is that if you have to get out of it. And there's only one thing you can do to get out of it. And no one's going to like it. But this is the thing. To get out of that stuck place, which does happen sometimes, if you get addicted to the grief, is you got to get uncomfortable. And that means that every single thing that you do not want to do, everything you have to do rigorously. You have to put yourself onto a daily diet of doing everything you don't like doing every day until you break it. So whether it's speaking publicly, whether it's socializing and getting out, whether it's putting yourself out there again, you have to do it. And that's the other piece as well, is now you're hearing a pattern here. In order to live a life, we have to go through phases of discomfort. That is, we have to get out of our comfort zones. We have to, and right now the general comfort zone is being in limbo. We have to embrace comfort zones, which is embracing change, which is embracing death, and then guess what? You get to get reborn. And when you get to be reborn, wow, how much joy isn't that? Look into a young newborn's eyes, and if you don't see incredible joy, then I don't know. And when you start embracing life and death and that whole flow, and you live by that code, really it needs to become a code for living, then it's not such resistance when you have to go through it again, because I really don't quite like what I have to do, but I relax into it. I surrender, and I know it's going to go where I need it to go. I may not know where that is, but I know it's a good thing. So we've been way too stuck in living in the matrix, and the entire world has been given a chance to die, actually. And I really hope that we are able to let go of a lot of things and create a lot of new things out of this time. I really, it is my deepest prayer. It is my deepest prayer.
Well, thank you so much for this really enlightening conversation. I don't think that people talk about this, and I've never had the conversation in this way before. I can't wait to read your book and to spread it around. And for people who are watching, people give me nice compliments. They say to me all the time, "Sarah, you're always changing. You're always this," and that is very nice. And I think the key is because I've dealt with death so many times in my life, not physical death, but my own death in my life, that I've just, like you said, it's not as scary when you know what the other side is like. So can you give people, just kind of to close everything off today, what can we do at this time? And everyone's different, so there's no pressure on you to give the perfect answer, but from your perspective, how can we embrace death? Even if it's not all the way, even if it's just a little bit of the way.
I think, people are, I've noticed, spending a lot of time getting angry.
Yeah.
At a lot of time. I think surrender, number one. Let's use the word surrender. When you're arguing and getting angry, you're not surrendering. You're just not surrendering. I mean, I'll just share really briefly, like, we're doing the most draconian lockdown in the world, certainly in South Africa, to prevent deaths from COVID-19. But we're going to have deaths from starvation.
Yep.
Instead. So Right. So no matter which way we swing this cat, this is not going down well. So we need to surrender to the process. We need to take stock of what we've been doing in our lives that really is not bringing us joy. We need to find that place between the rock and the harder place, like a tiny little gap, the tiniest gap between the rock and the hard place, now the rock and the harder place. And in that gap lies the possibilities for your recreated life. And you've got to dig down and find that. And start feeling into, what is that? What do I really want? What do I really want? And then start realizing, I have to feed that. I have to. Because living in any way, in a restricted way, in my mind, in my lifestyle, in anything, it's not okay. It's not who I am, and it doesn't bring light to the world. If I'm not living at my joy, I'm not bringing light to the world. I'm not serving everyone else. So I think those are a few things that I want to suggest. While we're still going through the death process, we may not have absolute clarity, as you said, Sarah. Once you finish it, then you have clarity. So, but just to start doing those few things, surrendering, relaxing into it, taking stock of what's really not okay for you, starting to allow the little visions of the future to start coming in, and to realize you're going to have to embrace those visions, no matter how hard they are. I think that's my parting words for now. Simple, but
Powerful.
But doable. Thank you. Thank you, Sarah. I want to apologize to everyone for the lighting. I'm sorry we had some lighting challenges here today, but thank you. I hope you can vaguely see me. Thank you, Sarah, for your time. I really appreciate it. Thank you for creating this forum for people, all the energy and work you're doing. I know it's going to be phenomenal.
Thank you so much, Julie. It's been so good.
My pleasure.
I'll
Have
talk
a beautiful day. Talk to you soon. Bye, everyone.
Bye.